scripts with some very talented writers, but I can put them in any horrible predicament I choose.
Some of the former child stars behind those shows say they were subjected to inappropriate work environments.
Hey, welcome back and thanks for joining me. If you are new here, hi, my name is Jasmine. This is my second channel where I do movie reviews, TV commentary, and I tell the occasional story time. So I recently decided to watch Quiet on Set. It is a short docu-series that has aired on ID as well as Max. I found it very insightful. This docu-series follows the 2+ decades of both questionable and obvious predatory behavior of the adults that worked for Nickelodeon, specifically Dan Schneider and Bryan Peck, and even more specifically the cast and crew that worked for Dan Schneider. I watched this all over a 24-hour period. Sure, I had other things to do like take a nap. When I was a kid, I watched all the shows that he made, and even as a preteen and a teen, I saw a lot of things on his shows that I'm like, I don't know if Disney could get away with that, because I feel like Disney was a little bit stricter. I feel like Nickelodeon shows were looser. They kind of got away with a lot more. For example, why was Nicole on Zoey 101 absolutely obsessed with boys? She was like the eye candy of boys, and she was a 12-year-old. I remember thinking as a kid, wow, that's really weird how she's acting.
I was 12 years old when I started Zoey 101.
Ooh, cute boy to left, green shirt, backpack.
When I look back at it, my character was there for the boys. Nicole was the archetype of male gaze female, where she was girly, very short skirts, and pink, like kid eye candy.
It makes me look chesty.
That's another thing I noticed in these shows, the wardrobe. The girls in Victorious and Zoey 101, and I know that there were a few episodes of Victorious where Ariana Grande was wearing very short dresses and very low-cut tops with super high heels. Although I will say that some of the girls that I went to school with kind of dressed in a similar way. It was definitely not school appropriate. I do remember in 7th grade in the locker room, the girls tried to outdo each other and who could have the most cleavage and the shortest mini skirt. There was one episode where Tori wrote Trina a song and she was wearing a dress that barely covered her butt cheek. She's dancing on the counter, spinning around, all in this very short, tight dress. Although the boy characters, they were wearing very normal clothing, you know, for boys their ages, generally. This doesn't mean they weren't humiliated in other ways. Let's not forget the bonus scenes, specifically the scenes where Ariana Grande was doing some questionable things on camera. They were supposed to be funny. When I watched them, they just made me feel really uncomfortable because it kind of reminded me of the jokes that kids at school would tell, and those also made me uncomfortable. Kids my age were largely very horny. They made all kinds of innuendo at school, jokes, gestures that implied certain things. Being around the weird stuff at school, I did notice some similarities on his show in my younger years. I would wonder why he was able to do this on Nickelodeon, and they had a lot looser writing than Disney had. Dan Schneider and Nickelodeon, they got away with this so much. But now everybody's getting exposed. There were tons of sitcoms between these two channels. These channels were not exclusively cartoons anymore. Drake and Josh was my absolute favorite. It was at the top of the list, like with Victorious and The Amanda Show and iCarly, as well as The Keenan and Kel Show. They were crazy and hilarious. My little brother and I watched the show all the time, especially on the weekends. Sometimes they would have a marathon, and I noticed that it was considerably funny than most of the Disney sitcoms, because most of those were pretty corny, let's be real. Let's talk a little bit about the employees that worked for Nickelodeon, shall we? One employee stated that she was overworked with no food or bathroom breaks.
I worked with Dan on all that. You had to be as good or better or put more hours in or do longer things than Dan did. And we all did it. Or you got fired. Dan Schneider would sit in the very back row and make comments the whole time. And they were sometimes very degrading.
This particular employee was so overworked that she ended up in the hospital.
I would be editing from 8 a.m. to midnight. You didn't eat, you didn't go to the bathroom. Dan would be like, wait a minute, can you hold it? Can you wait a minute?
What on earth? The actual fresh-baked audacity of these people. No bathroom breaks. Are you serious? Okay, I'll pee here on the floor. Let's see if you're gonna allow bathroom breaks after that. No, I would go regardless. Nobody can tell me that I cannot pee. And as she was leaving, she could hear the staff members asking how the show is going to get done now.
I keeled over and I ended up having to go to the hospital. And as I'm leaving and curled over, I could hear someone say, "How is the show going to get finished?" And I just remember saying, "I'll be right back."
Something about Drake's character on Drake and Josh didn't sit right with me. I feel like Drake's character was the male equivalent to Alexa's character on Zoe 101. There were so many episodes of Drake and Josh where he was just in a movie theater or at school making out with a girl. He had a different girlfriend like every week. I think that was the only trait that I hated about his character. You don't know this, but I hate shows when it's like they're supposed to be about one thing and then they turn into who's dating who. I don't know the grammar for that. For me, I get bored very quickly of that. It will make me stop watching a show entirely, regardless of how long I've been watching the show. Drake and Josh was a little bit of that sprinkled in, but I don't think it completely overshadowed the theme of the show, which may be why I was less annoyed. After watching the docuseries, I felt like the show was the best way for these people to really talk about their experiences. You can tell by their faces that they're remembering and digging deep into their memories of these acting jobs. The entire point of the series is to show people behind the scenes what it's like and why parents have to be adamant in being near their children when around strangers, whether it's work or whatever, which I think you should be doing anyways. You should be around your kids as much as you possibly can. You would do that if they were in any other place with a bunch of strangers, would you not? Parents may not have known, but I would think that at least some of them noticed that their kid was acting differently, just displaying different behavior after a day of working with Dan Schneider. Many adults were like totally oblivious, or they just didn't care about the welfare of the kids. I'm actually shocked that the actors work so well. They're very good at acting on a sitcom, and they went on to do other things, better things, some of them. I remember when I was 5 or 6 years old, my mom, she actually took me to an audition to be in a commercial. I don't know if it was because I was a bossy child or because I could just like read very well for my age, but she thought it was a good idea. I didn't understand at the time why I was reading all these lines about a kid's shampoo, and that's hilarious because I didn't know how I was supposed to say that stuff when I was reading. So I didn't know that I was supposed to be acting. I do wonder how my life would have turned out if I were more enthusiastic at reading at that age, or if I pursued some type of career like that. My cats are fighting. Like, where in the timeline of the universe would I have landed if that was something that I was good at and pursued? We'll never really know. Hey everyone, editing Jasmine here. I forgot to tell the rest of this story when I was recording this. So after I did the audition, I went back to school. I think it was the next day or a couple of days, and then I went and bragged to people because I was in the first grade. I was, dumb. I went and bragged to people that I was going to be on TV, and everybody asked me what channel, and I was like, I don't know. And that's the end of the story. What's also really sad is that these kids were left on set with an unnamed number of adults that didn't do anything about the disturbing behavior.
People were looking back at old scenes and saying, Dan Schneider is obsessed with feet. Check this out.
It's all very gross and foul
Impossible
thing.
to escape children's feet.
Dan Schneider.
Absolutely disgusting.
He's a grown-ass man. What the are you doing?
Dan Schneider made great and highly rated TV shows for kids, and look what it costed. Just the mental and physical well-being of who knows how many children. Children are people. I like to say that a lot because it's true. I think it's my new favorite thing to say because I see children every day being the targets of things, especially on the internet. Every day, it's a new story about a child having to endure and suffer something that they should have never had to experience at the hands of adults. Adults that don't deserve kids. Adults that only see kids as paychecks for prop. But they are people, and I will die on this hill.
There's one video of Ariana Grande making a joke about a potato.
Sometimes I wonder if you can get juice from a potato.
Did that air on Nickelodeon?
The things that happen on the sets of All That, iCarly, Victorious, Zoe 101, and more are absolutely shameful. Not only did Dan Schneider frequently request massages from female employees, he was a tyrant.
He was just an egomaniac. When everybody is just kissing your butt and the money's crazy. Yeah, how do you avoid that? I don't know how you avoid that.
Jeanette McCurdy describes the creator who was mentally and verbally abusive in her book, I'm Glad My Mom Died. Jeanette struggled a lot with working on iCarly.
I worked with an incredibly emotionally abusive producer.
Being insulted by the people that worked there, and then she went on to work at Sam and Cat, which was not any better. Speaking of iCarly, why was Gibby shirtless so many times? Whose idea was that to have a child take off their shirt constantly for comedic effect? Put a pin in that. Dan constructed show after show, episode after episode that he says were reviewed by dozens of other people, and they approved these.
Yikes. I'm thirsty. In another video, Ariana's pouring water on herself in what seems like a very sexual manner, and people started saying, this feels inappropriate for children.
That's your argument? He really thought that his talent far surpassed any morality. A lot of people think this way about celebrities, and you can come to your own conclusions about whatever stories you see based on the proof. He was what, in his 20s at the time? He can't possibly be saying that he was distanced from the concept of right and wrong. I remain unconvinced.
I was excited to start my 3rd season. I thought my dream of being able to take my family quite literally out the hood was on its way.
I kind of knew by this time I was the real problem. Dan treated Bryan with caution. Like he side-eyed him. Bryan wasn't being invited back.
I was crying because I'm 13, 14, and I've built this family, and now I'm not a part of the family anymore. Like, dang, I didn't even get to say goodbye to my people. Like, when am I gonna see them again? The times that my mom was, raising hell, maybe that had a lot to do with the collective decision to kick me off. It was get them out of here.
Personally, I've been paranoid about creepy people ever since I was followed on my bike at 13, and probably even before that, because my grandma made us kids watch Dateline to Catch a Predator, and let me tell you, that probably saved us. I have a very short story time about that on my channel. I'll put it in the description.
Some of them became extremely famous. Some of them really struggled publicly.
After her arrest last week.
Now, some of them are starting to speak out about what happened when they were on his set.
I did not feel safe around Dan Schneider.
The show was talking about the parents were supposed to be able to watch what was happening from another room while the kids were on set. Children are among the most vulnerable population. Part of me does wonder if Amanda Bynes will ever tell what happened during her time as a child actor. Being able to share their story is cathartic for a lot of victims and can help them to move forward in life. However, I do understand that it's her story to tell, obviously. She's had all kinds of brushes with the law and mental health events, and to me, those are the signs of somebody dealing with a lot of mental or physical harm being done to them. Even as children, we do carry it on into our adulthood. Drake Bell went on to struggle with transitioning into adulthood and maintaining sobriety, a similar struggle to that of Amanda Bynes. On top of that, Drake suffered abuse outside of the work environment, so he just never caught a break.
It was the lead up to this premiere of Drake and Josh that marked one of the darkest chapters in this story.
Based on what I saw, his dad did try to protect his son, never leaving him alone and warning his wife to never, ever leave Bryan Peck alone with Drake, ever. Clearly, she doesn't know how to follow instructions. Too trusting, I don't know.
Dialogue coach Bryan Peck is arrested.
Drake loved nothing more than to entertain. He loved to make people laugh.
Bryan and I became really close because we had a lot of the same interests, which, looking back, I think that was probably a little calculated.
Bryan Peck drove a wedge between Drake Bell and his father. That is something that is typical of groomers. This tension grew and led to Drake firing his dad as his manager. It was then transferred to Drake's mom. People that are abusive try to alienate the person that they are abusing from their family and friends.
All the other parents would be seen and not heard, which I would never interrupt anything, but very rarely sat in the green room. I'd always be offset somewhere where I could always keep my eyes on Drake. And unfortunately, I started seeing Bryan start to just hang around Drake too much. Drake would be in the dressing room or something, and in would pop Bryan and just touch Drake. You know, do things that, wait a second. And the thing is, this is in front of people. Then he'd maybe walk over to Drake and be feeding him some lines or whatever and put his arm around his waist, put his hand up on his shoulder and kind of run it down his arm, things like that. And this would happen routinely, was just always uncomfortable.
See, often with divorced families, predators can sense when children are vulnerable. This is also something that I noticed, and they did touch on this in the show. The parents were actually not allowed to be around their kids on the set for whatever reason, but they were supposed to be watching from another room, and I guess that wasn't happening either, so they were largely unaware of some of the things going on. Children are among the most vulnerable population. So Drake's mom didn't like driving super far. She didn't like having to do that for her kid. Drake was with Bryan so far away from his home, sleeping on Bryan's couch, and one day he wakes up to Bryan doing unspeakable things to him.
And when this is announced, it is said that these charges are related to a child actor.
It certainly has all of the ingredients for a huge scandal, but it wasn't.
In court, Drake described his side of the courtroom as just his mom, him, and his brother. Bryan Peck's side of the courtroom was completely full of supporters. The amount of people that supported this wretched man is crazy. Bryan Peck received 16 months in jail. That's it. For 6 months of violating Drake.
If you can't do the time, don't do the crime. Okay, time's up.
While we were watching Drake goof off with his TV stepbrother, he was suffering greatly. It was all happening during his most formative years. And people don't understand this, and some people don't care, but the stuff that happens to you as a kid, it does write on the slate of who you are. It does affect how you do things every day, how you go about your daily routine, your attitude, the way you speak, the things that you like, the things that you dislike. All of that writes on the slate of who you are, and then it kind of like molds you a certain way as you're growing.
Leo, as you know, is the latest, hottest, hunkiest teen idol there is.
Yeah, muscles.
I saw this video of Bryan Peck on Growing Pains with Leonardo DiCaprio, grabbing his shoulder, running across him and going down his arm. That's the kind of behavior I saw him with my son.
I can't pinpoint where I heard this quote, maybe on a documentary or celebrity news show, and I believe the person was discussing Justin Bieber when they said this. The person was explaining that the reason that so many child stars have problems as adults is because they could never express themselves when they were children. And that's something that I always think about whenever I would see Lindsay Lohan or Amanda Bynes on the news. They can't tell what's happening to them as children. They pretty much take it out in other ways. They're doing all this stuff except actually getting to the root of what their issue is, because they're just holding in so much, and that has to be very painful, I imagine, for the price of fame.
So I went to production and said, you know, I really am very uncomfortable with this guy, Bryan Peck, always being around my son. I go, I don't see anything abnormal, but it just doesn't, I don't have a good feeling. And she goes, oh, well, I don't know if you knew it or not, but he's gay. Maybe you're just homophobic and you just don't understand that he's a touchy-feely guy.
You do have a whole bunch of people telling you what to do. They're around you all the time. They tell you what to do, how to talk, what to eat, how to act, what to wear.
By the late 2000s, Dan had more control than pretty much any showrunner at Nickelodeon. He had created his own little fiefdom.
All right.
But his style had a little bit of edge in it. It also really pushed the boundaries of sexualizing young girls.
It's so cool! Want to get slapped with a sausage? Sure!
And don't question anyone, especially not the big shot director that you're going to be working with, or you won't book any more jobs. They'll probably label you as difficult.
There's a joke about being on the wood.
I want to be on the wood. What's the wood? I want to be on it.
You have actors shaking weights in a way that seems very clearly sexual. And these actors, for the most part, are minors.
You are just a living, breathing thing that obeys orders. I'm going slightly off on a tangent because sometimes I dislike the way that other people cover things. Yes, I'm going to briefly complain. So I saw a couple of people already talk about this whole docuseries. One was too political. I stopped watching after about 3 minutes. And then I watched part of somebody else's video on it. I'm not going to name names because the names really don't matter. Nobody's going to care what I have to say. The political commentator, I felt like that wasn't really a very neutral way to watch this docuseries because, one, she wasn't there, so how would she possibly know if there are racist things happening on the set in addition to everything else? That's what you chose to focus on in the first couple of minutes of doing this, and that's why I stopped watching. How would you know? If that was their experience, then that was their experience. This was still the 90s. People were not completely okay with people of other races. It's 2024. People still aren't okay. Not sure why that's the part that stuck out. That doesn't really stick out to me. It was the 90s when the black actors were referring to being on All That, and the early 2000s on The Amanda Show. There was a lot of subtle and not so subtle racial things in those TV shows. Kids TV was not devoid of that. Even I noticed at the time that some of the black characters had the stereotypical talk like a black person or whatever behavior or whatever you want to call it. You know what I'm trying to say. There was a black Boy Scout selling Girl Scout cookies, but the scene is really inspired from another type of transaction. Cocaine. Mind you, I watched these TV shows all the time. The other thing I was going to say is the second person that I watched, I noticed with a lot of his videos, he posts several a day sometimes, and it isn't always accurate information, so just be careful of who you watch because a lot of them can be spreading misinformation or just like incomplete information. Actually do like a couple of hours of research instead of hitting record the second something happens. People that worry about uploading too many videos rather than focusing on the quality and the integrity of the video, that is not the type of of content that I want to see. When I'm watching, it's like that YouTube creator and the audience are reacting to the information for the very first time, and they kind of give the impression that they did research, but they also are reacting for the first time, so it sounds very disingenuous and it sounds incomplete to me. Those types of videos are annoying. The reason I say that is because he's covered Drake Bell in several videos, and when I'm watching it, it's like I notice that the information is sounding very new to him. Instead of being prepared on what to say and getting the facts straight, or getting as much facts as you can get on the subject, because we know not everything is public, do your best. So that tells me that he either wasn't paying attention or he didn't watch it in full, which we now know presented a variety of misinformation. Is that me being picky? Probably. It's Zoom meeting. I will leave a link for that in the description so you can watch for yourself. It's about 30 minutes. Right at around 22 minutes, you're going to notice things that a lot of people get wrong, and a lot of misinformation came out of that just because people did not watch that court video. I feel like a lot of YouTube creators just wing it, and sometimes the ones that I used to watch would do that. They need a script, and that is my pet peeve. Another person on the show stated that Dan didn't like female writers. He stated that women weren't funny.
It was early on when we first started that Dan said he didn't think women were funny.
He said women can't write funny. He challenged us to name a funny female writer. And he said this to the writers in the writer's room. That was my first indication of trouble, that maybe this guy didn't really value women in the writer's room.
The two women that applied and wanted the job, they had the privilege of splitting a salary.
I remember speaking to the line producer, and she said that I was going to have to split a salary with a writer that I did not know.
So they were getting two for the price of one. They were going to hire two women and have them share a salary. And I never saw it happen to any of the men.
Later on, they did file a complaint about that. She is sniffing my hair.
Having the writers split their salary was against the rules for the show. So I called the Writers Guild to ask them if that was true. Can there be teams on this show? And they said no.
Jenny told me this, and I was going like, wow, they were trying to pull a fast one.
One actor who was a little girl at the time, her name is Katrina, she was fired for basically going through puberty. You think you know some people.
You can't be the fat one. I still hear those words in my head to this day, and it's funny because shortly after that call, I went through puberty. The producers freak out because now I look like a woman, and I'm not little girlish anymore. So then that became an issue. After that, I'm sort of like edged out.
There were actors that talked about the unusual costumes, the scripts, scenes with feet, questionable substances on people's faces, but by some Hollywood miracle, it aired. There were actors that struggled with substance issues due to what they were exposed to in their very young ages. Matthew Underwood, who was harmed by his own agent around the time that he was on Zoe 101 and so much more. And this was one of the things that made him quit acting. They only fired the agent. He didn't talk about any criminal charges that were brought onto the agent, just that they were fired. So they're still free to work in the industry. All in all, if you like documentaries or just protecting children in general, you should like the idea of protecting children. I do recommend watching the docu-series. It does talk a lot about a lot of red flags in the industry. It's 4 episodes as of right now. Probably by the time you see this video, episode 5 will be out. It's one of those documentaries that will make you think a lot. As Cat Williams said, everybody's getting exposed in 2024, and I do really enjoy seeing criminals face justice. As we can see, he was correct. This will probably be the only video that I do regarding this show, mostly because it's very depressing and that just isn't the type of stuff that I normally cover. But I covered Nickelodeon because it is something that a ton of us grew up watching. Now we're all seeing these adults that were child actors relay their awful experiences, and it's terribly sad and infuriating when it comes to many of the adults. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to hire me to do a custom drawing for you, please contact me on my website, jasminebakerart.com. Include as much information as you possibly can and we can talk. Please subscribe. I do try to make new videos every single week. They do take a long time to edit. Sometimes I'm late, just like the stereotypical black person. I do make a lot of TV commentary, movie reviews / deep dives, and the occasional story time. And I will see you in the next one. Bye!